Okay, so these are the toss-ups of authors and works in the section of my study guide for literature, Willa Cather through William Somerset Maugham. There are 52 toss-ups, and I'm going to divide it into two equal videos, the first half being obviously 26 toss-ups, and then the second video, the 26 others in this text. So let's go ahead and get started. Toss-up number one. In one work by this author, the protagonist dreams he is grabbing a certain famous composer's ponytail. A sculpture of the Virgin Mary leads a character created by this author to briefly pursue an artistic career after leaving the monastery home to his friend Narcissus. After joining the Walsell in Castalia, this author's character, Joseph Knecht, masters the glass bead game. The ferryman, Vasudeva, appears in a work by this author in which the protagonist falls in love with Kamala. One of this author's characters has sex with Pablo, but then is stabbed in the Magic Theater by Harry Haller. For 10 points, name this author of Siddhartha and Steppenwolf. And that is Hermann Hesse. Toss-up 2. This poem describes a man's hanging face like a devil sick of sin, and was originally written in the Craig Lockhart Hospital, like many others by its author. The speaker of this poem sees an ecstasy of fumbling by men who were bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, and later pictures a man with blood come gargling from froth-corrupted lungs. This poem, which tells its reader not to tell with such high zest the title Old Lie, gets its title from a work by Horace. For 10 points, name this poem by Wilfred Owen, whose title means it is sweet and honorable. And that is Dulce et Decorum Est. Dulce et Decorum Est. Toss-up number 3. This man's adaptation of an earlier poem asks, "Why should I climb the lookout?" before noting that the monkeys make sorrowful noise overhead. That poem is a series of reminiscences beginning while my hair was still cut straight across my forehead. This man's work, as a translator, appears in a Riposts and Cathy, which includes an adaptation of Li Po entitled The River Merchant's Wife, a letter. The River Merchant's Wife, a letter. This poet, whose slogan was "Make it new," described apparitions of these faces in a crowd as petals on a wet black bough in his 2-line poem, In a Station of the Metro. For 10 points. Name this American poet who, while incarcerated in St. Elizabeth's Hospital, wrote the rock drill section of his 120-section epic, The Cantos. And that is Ezra Pound. Toss-up 4. A character in this novel is shocked to see students at Eton laughing at footage of Christians who punish themselves with whips. In this novel, people are indoctrinated by hypnopedia with phrases such as civilization is sterilization. This novel describes the people creating Bukhanovsky process and the corruption or consumption of soma. In this novel, the world comptroller Mustafa Mond exiles Bernard Marx, who introduces John the Savage to civilization. For 10 points, name this dystopian novel set in the year 632 after Ford, which was written by Aldous Huxley. And that is Brave New World. Toss-up number 5. A scandal arose when this poet was defeated by Oric Johns in a contest held by the Lyric Year, despite widespread admiration for her submission, whose speaker tells of how infinity came down and settled over me after reaching up to touch the sky. This poet claimed that heroes seek release from dusty bondage into luminous air. In the Petrarchian sonnet, Euclid alone has looked upon beauty bare. The 2-line poem, Safe upon the solid rock, the ugly houses stand, come and see my shining palace built upon the sand, is the second entry in a collection by this author. That collection's first poem begins, My candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night. For 10 points, name this author of Renaissance and A Few Figs from Thistles. And that is Edna St. Vincent Millay. Toss-up number 6. The protagonist of this book trips and rolls down a hill after meeting his love interest outside a country fairground. At the end of this book, its protagonist departs on a train with his mind carried away by his growing passion for dreams. Kate Swift, a teacher whose naked body is observed by the Reverend Curtis Hartman, feels the passionate desire to be loved by a man after seeing the protagonist of this book. In the story Sophistication, Helen White kisses this book's protagonist, who works for the Eagle. Wing Biddlebaum's propensity to touch young people is the subject of this book story, Hands. For 10 points, name this book about journalist George Willard's observations of life in a small Midwestern town by Sherwood Anderson. And that is Winesburg, Ohio. Winesburg, Ohio. Toss-up number 7. Charlie Wales goes to Paris to regain custody over his daughter in this author's short story, Babylon Revisited. In one of this author's novels, Anthony Patch and Gloria Gilbert throw wild parties while waiting to inherit Anthony's grandfather's money. In another of his novels, Armory Blaine's pursuit of Rosalind Connage ends after a financial disaster. This author of The Beautiful and the Damned, Dick and Nicole Diver, are the subject of his... This author of The Beautiful and the Damned, Dick Diver and Nicole Diver are the subject of his work, Tender as the Night, inspired by his own wife Zelda checking into a mental institution. Daisy Buchanan runs over Myrtle Wilson, another work by this man, which ends with the protagonist Nick Carraway returning back to his hometown. For 10 points, name this author of The Great Gatsby. And that is F. Scott Fitzgerald. Toss-up number 8. In this poem, the narrator claims that the darkness drops again before the title event. This poem also claims that the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. A creature with lion body and the head of a man in this poem is seen in a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi. This poem opens with turning and turning in the widening gyre and contains the line, things fall apart. At the end of this poem, the narrator asks, what rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? For 10 points, name this William Butler Yeats poem whose title alludes to the return of Christ. And that is The Second Coming. Toss-up number 9. Cyril Beardsall narrates one novel by this author, which takes place in Nethermere and focuses on Laetitia. This author of The Wild Peacock wrote a short story in which a young boy dies after betting on Malabar and Bassett and trace the Brangwyn family through multiple works. Another novel by this author focuses on the mother and son duo, Gertrude and Paul Morell. This author of The Rocking Horse Winner and The Rainbow wrote a novel which prompted an obscenity trial against Penguin Books and describes an affair of a woman whose husband has been paralyzed from the waist down with the gamekeeper, Oliver Mellors. For 10 points, name this British author of Lady Chatterley's Lover. And that is D.H. Lawrence. Toss-up number 10. In this play, a painted rose, a room painted yellow, and a cave are used to represent 3 different homes. Early in this play, a young character hears a lullaby that describes the dagger-pinioned eyeballs and bleeding hooves of a dying horse who is drinking from the stream of death. 2 violins screech as Death, disguised as a beggar woman, extends her coat at this play's climax to cover up the male leads stabbing each other. Those 2 leads were brought together thanks to the Light of the Moon, which is represented by a young woodcutter with a white face. Leonardo Felix runs off with the bride during the title event of this play. For 10 points, name this first entry in the Rural trilogy of plays by Federico Garcia Lorca. And that would be Blood Wedding. Toss-up number 11. This author wrote the famous scene in which a lobster devours a squid in the first novel of his trilogy of desire about the business tycoon Frank Cowperwood, The Financier. And another novel by this author, George Hurstwood, embezzles money to elope with the title character, but that member of the Meaber family eventually abandons him. In his most famous work, the protagonist goes on a canoe ride with his pregnant girlfriend contemplating to kill her, and she falls out on her own. For 10 points, name this writer who created Clyde Griffiths and wrote Sister Carrie and An American Tragedy. And that is Theodore Dreiser. Toss-up 12. Characters in this novel refer to sitting in lounge chairs on a terrace as living horizontally. This novel's protagonist decides that man is the master of contradictions and dreams about witches laughtering a child in the chapter Snow. One character in this novel is completely unable to finish his sentences. That man, the suicidal malaria patient Minhir Peepercorn, is introduced as the new lover of Madame Chauchat. An anticlimactic duel results in the death of neither Settembrini nor the Jesuit Leo Nafta in this novel, whose protagonist initially plans on a brief visit to his cousin Joachim. For 10 points, name this novel in which Hans Castorp spends 7 years in the Berghof Sanatorium, a work of Thomas Mann. And that would be The Magic Mountain. Toss-up number 13. A novel by this author consists of monologues by 6 friends of the deceased Percival, interspersed with italicized descriptions of a seascape. A character created by this author compares the range of human thought to the alphabet and resents being stuck at Q. That novel by this author of The Waves ends as the Ramsey family sail to the title place and Lily Briscoe finishes a painting. The title woman of a Stream of Consciousness novel by this author admires the suicide of Septimus Smith. In an essay, she imagined Judith Shakespeare to show why women writers need the title space. For 10 points, name this author of To the Lighthouse, Mrs. Dalloway, and A Room of One's Own. and that is Virginia Woolf. Toss-up 14. A character in this poem states that his job is to swell a progress, start a scene or two, before declaring that he is at times the fool. The speaker of this poem worries about people reacting to a bald spot in his hair and describes being afraid after seeing the eternal footman hold my coat. This poem mentions a yellow fog that rubs the window panes. The title character exclaims, "No, I am not Prince Hamlet," and wonders, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" A room where the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo, appears in, for 10 points, what poem by T.S. Eliot? And that is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Toss-up number 15. In one novel by this author, the abused wife Magdalena saves the protagonist from her husband Buck Scales. Another work by this author chronicles the journey of Thea Kronborg as she becomes an opera singer. A third novel by this author focuses on a family of Swedish-American immigrants in the town of Hanover. This author of Death Comes for the Archbishop had another novel, The Song of the Lark, as a part of her Prairie trilogy. This author also wrote a novel in which the title Bohemian Women eventually marries Anton Cusack after moving back to Nebraska and is friends with Jim Burden. For 10 points, name this author of O Pioneers and My Antonia. And that is Willa Cather. Toss-up 16. The protagonist of this novel spends some time with the spoiled debutante Mercedes and her shallow and unprepared companions Hal and Charles. That protagonist is killed by Manuel, the gardener from Judge Miller's estate, before working with Francois and Perrault delivering mail. Other characters in this novel include the prospector Jack Thornton, whose death at the hands of Yehat Indians is avenged by the protagonist. For 10 points, name this Jack London novel about the adventures of a dog named Buck. And that is The Call of the Wild. Toss-up 17. This author created a character who dies in a miscarriage caused by drinking after being beaten by Jim Blakeson. One work by this author sees the Polish miner Kosti befriend a character who is in love with, but ultimately does not marry, Isabel Bradley. This author of Liza of Lambeth and creator of Larry Darrell in The Razor's Edge wrote a novel in which Sally Thorpe, a Finley sister, marries the club-footed Philip Carey. He wrote a novel based on the life of Paul Gauguin, in which Charles Strickland moves to Tahiti. For 10 points, name this author of Human Bondage and The Moon and Sixpence. And that is William Somerset Maugham. Toss-up number 18. The main character in this work attacks the liberal lawyer Seneca Doane. In this novel, the reporter, Kenneth Escott, is paid to write an article about a Presbyterian Sunday school. The prison sentence of Paul Riesling in this novel causes the title character to flirt with liberalism, but the title character ultimately joins the Good Citizens League. For 10 points, name this novel about the title businessmen in the town of Zenith, a work of Sinclair Lewis. And that is Babbitt. Toss-up 19. This author wrote a short story in which the plain title character is pursued by the handsome John Marble, causing her mother to anticipate the failure of their marriage. In addition to telling about the widow, Mrs. Ewing, in Lolita, this writer told of a character who gave his wife a black eye and left her for 2 days when she joked about it while drinking. The protagonist of that story toasts drinks with her husband, saying, "Here's mud in your eye." She spends night at Jimmy's with her boyfriends when that husband, Herbie, leaves her for Detroit. That title character travels to New Jersey to obtain 2 vials of Veronal, but her attempt at suicide with them is unsuccessful. For 10 points, name this author who created Hazel Morse in Big Blonde, a founding member of the Algonquin Round Table. And that is Dorothy Parker. Toss-up number 20. In an incident in this novel, the protagonist befriends a woman after mistakenly assuming she had not yet taken off her shoes. Nancy Derrick has an affair with the superintendent of police, McBride, while Harry Turton is the tax collector for a town whose chief civil surgeon, Major Callender, is the protagonist's boss. Set in Chandrapur, a central event in this novel allegedly occurs at the Marabar Caves, where Mrs. Moore and Rani Heslop's wife travel. Adela Quested accuses Dr. Aziz of rape in, for 10 points, what E.M. Forster novel? And that is A Passage to India. Toss-up number 21. In a poem by this author, a boy tells the moon to run and avoid being turned into jewelry after the moon shows him her breasts. 3 woodcutters appear at the beginning of the 3rd act of one of his plays and claim that a pair of lovers will be found if the moon comes out. In a play by this author of The Butterfly's Evil Spell, Adela hangs herself after her sisters learn that she is Pepe El Romano's lover. The line, at 5 in the afternoon, is repeated over and over again in his poem, Lament for the Death of a Bullfighter. A woman walks back to a village covered in blood after Leonardo Felix and the groom kill each other in one of his plays in his Rural trilogy. For 10 points, name this Spanish playwright of Blood Wedding and the House of Bernarda Alba. And that is Federico Garcia Lorca. Garcia Lorca. Toss-up number 22. In the beginning scenes of this novel, one character defies his father by standing below his window through the night. The protagonist has a dream in which he finds his lover Songbird dead in a cage, and the son he later has with that lover steals a raft and sails away. A ferryman in this novel, Vasudeva, instructs the title character to listen to the river after he does not find satisfaction with the wandering Samanas, and parts way with his best friend, Govinda. For 10 points, name this novel that follows a man's journey to enlightenment by Hermann Hesse. And that is Siddhartha. Toss-up number 23. In one work, this man wrote, "The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers, the tenderness of patient minds of the title figures." In that poem, this man asks, "What passing bells for thee who die as cattle?" The speaker of another of this man's poem sees, dim through the misty panes of thick green light as under a green sea, a man dying in a gas attack. This poet of futility describes soldiers bent double like old beggars under sacks as victims of the old lie. Name, for 10 points, this English First World War poet of Anthem for Doomed Youth and Dulce et Decorum Est. And that would be Wilfred Owen. Toss-up number 24. The protagonist of this novel notices a photo of a hen on a blurred rock before getting drunk for the second time in his life. A character in this novel hates the word hulking, and another requests performances of a Vladimir Tostov piece and The Love Nest. In this novel, a character with cufflinks made of teeth fixed the 1919 World Series, and a yellow car kills a resident of the Valley of Ashes, watched over by T.J. Eckelberg. Jordan Baker attends the parties of the title character of this novel, who fixates on a green light on Daisy Buchanan's dock. For 10 points, name this novel, narrated by Nick Carraway by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And that is The Great Gatsby. Toss-up 25. In a story by this author, Mrs. Spence accuses Mr. Hudson of poisoning his wife, but really the criminal was Doris, Hutton's mistress. This author of The Gioconda Smile wrote about Will Farnaby in the novel Island. One of this author's works is about a group of people led by Mrs. Aldwinkle, in which discusses the glories of the Renaissance. This author of Those Barren Leaves wrote a novel about a house partly located at Mr. Wimbush's title estate, as viewed through the eyes of Dennis Stone. Drugs commonly appear in this author's works, such as his personal experience detailed in The Doors of Perception, and as the ubiquitous Soma in another work. That work includes a man named John the Savage, who debates the resident world comptroller Mustafa Mond. For 10 points, name this author of Eyeless in Gaza, Chrome Yellow, and Brave New World. And that is Aldous Huxley. Toss-up 26. During one scene in this novel, the officer, Tommy Duke, argues that individuality is overdeveloped, describing Arnold Hammond's wife as luggage. A fake marriage between John Thomas and Lady Jane occurs in this novel, whose protagonist travels to Venice to see the artist Duncan Forbes and secure a divorce. An affair with the playwright Michaelis happens early in this novel before the title character is seen looking at the Ragby estate by the nurse, Mrs. Bolton. Constance cheats on her husband Clifford with the gamekeeper Oliver Mellors in, for 10 points, What Novel by D.H. Lawrence. And that is Lady Chatterley's Lover. Toss-up number 27. Oh, that would be it. So I hope the last one was Lady Chatterley's Lover. I always mix that up with Sons and Lovers, both by D.H. Lawrence. But we'll make another video for the second half, starting with question number 27.